Chapter 1. The missing name. Cassy Drewer was not unhappy. That was the strange part. She sat on the far end of the couch with her legs tucked beneath her, phone balanced in her palm, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the room behind her. Jack was in the kitchen, negotiating with a stubborn jar of pasta sauce, narrating the conflict as if the jar might respond to reason. The light above the sink cast a soft yellow glow across the counters, and everything about the evening felt settled, earned, comfortable in the way people meant when they said they were doing well. She should have been content. Instead, something pressed against her chest with the persistence of a thought she couldn't quite finish. Cassy scrolled through her contacts without looking for anything in particular. It was the digital equivalent of rifling through a junk drawer. Old coworkers, numbers she no longer recognized, names that belonged to past versions of herself. She stopped when she reached the letter M. Michael's Brian. Her thumb hovered. For a moment, she didn't understand why the name felt heavy. It sat there in the same neutral font as everyone else, unremarkable, unadorned. No emojis. No notes. Just a name she hadn't touched in years. Then the realization landed with a quiet thud. She hadn't thought about her father in a very long time. Not recently, not meaningfully. Not in the way that suggested a living connection. He existed in her mind the way old houses did, structures you passed in memory but never entered anymore. Familiar from the outside, closed off without ceremony. Her stomach tightened. Jack twisted the jar open with a victorious grunt. "Ha!" he said to no one in particular. Persistence wins again. "Congratulations," Cassy said automatically. He smiled at her over his shoulder. "You sound thrilled." "I contain multitudes," she replied, and he laughed, turning back to the stove. Cassy stared at the phone again. The last time she had spoken to her father, she'd been 16 years old and full of a righteousness that had felt like clarity at the time. She remembered the way her voice hadn't shaken when she told him she didn't want to see him anymore. She remembered the way he'd gone still, as if bracing against an impact only he could feel. She hadn't remembered the sound of his voice in years. Her parents had divorced when she was 12. Her mother had explained it gently, sitting at the edge of Cassy's bed, smoothing her hair the way she did when delivering truths she'd already rehearsed. "I'm just not happy anymore," her mother had said. "And that's okay. Sometimes families change shape." Cassy had nodded, trusting that adults knew what they were doing. The word divorce had felt abstract then, something that belonged to other families. At first, the visits with her dad had been awkward but earnest. He'd taken her to cheap movie matinees and tried to recreate old traditions with substitutes that never quite fit. He smiled too much. He asked too many questions. He tried. Over time, her mother's commentary had filled in the gaps. Little things at first, complaints framed as explanations. "He's behind again. I don't know why he can't just do what he's supposed to do. He'd rather spend money on himself than on you." Cassy hadn't known what child support actually was. She only knew that her mother paid for everything. Her clothes, her school supplies, her extracurriculars. Her mother made a point of showing her receipts, laying them out on the kitchen table as if the numbers told a story Cassy was supposed to understand. Love equaled provision. Provision equaled presence. Absence equaled indifference. The logic settled in slowly, deeply. It didn't arrive with one defining moment. It layered itself over years until resentment felt like fact. On her 16th birthday, her father had arrived with a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond necklace that caught the light when he opened it, brilliant and unmistakably expensive. Cassy remembered thinking it was too much, that it felt like compensation rather than celebration. Later, after the guests had left and the music had faded, she told him the thing she'd been rehearsing in her head for months. "I don't have to visit anymore," she'd said. "I don't want to." She could still see his face when she thought about it now. The way devastation had crossed his features so quickly it had startled her. She'd mistaken his silence for guilt. She hadn't stayed long enough to see what else it might have been. That was the last time she'd spoken to him. She graduated high school without him. College too. She married Jack in a sunlit venue with white chairs and wildflowers, never once wondering if her father might be somewhere nearby. She had believed she was strong for it. Now, sitting on the couch at 36 with her husband humming off key in the kitchen, she wondered if strength and survival had been confused somewhere along the way. Her thumb moved before she could stop it. She tapped the number. The call rang once, twice, then went to an automated message. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Cassy swallowed. She hadn't expected otherwise. Still, the finality of it stung. She scrolled again, further down the list, until she found another name she hadn't touched in even longer. Michael's, Ruth, her grandmother. Cassy hesitated, then pressed call. The phone rang 4 times before it was answered. Yes, the voice was older than Cassy remembered. Sharper too. "Hi," Cassy said. It's Cassy." There was a pause, a breath. "I know who you are." They made small talk that felt like stepping carefully across cracked ice. Cassy asked about the weather, about her grandmother's health, about nothing that mattered. Finally, Ruth cut in. "Why are you calling?" Cassy closed her eyes. "I was trying to reach my dad," she said. I don't have his number. The silence stretched. Long enough for Cassy to pull the phone away from her ear and check the screen. Then Ruth spoke again, her voice quieter now, steadier. Your father died 2 years ago, she said. Pancreatic cancer. The words didn't land all at once. They hovered, suspended, as if waiting for Cassy to be ready. Cassy's throat closed. I didn't know. I imagine not, Ruth said. He left something with me. A box. For you. In case you ever reached out. Cassy pressed her hand to her mouth. He thought of you constantly, Ruth continued. Even at the end. You were his first and last thought. The line went dead. Cassy stared at the phone, numb settling in like a second skin. Jack stepped into the living room, wiping his hands on a towel. Hey, he said, noticing her expression. What's wrong? She looked up at him, words gathering like a storm she didn't yet know how to weather. My dad, she said. He's dead. And just like that, the life she thought she understood cracked open, and everything she had avoided began to move. Chapter 2. The weight of almost. The word dead lingered in the air long after Cassy said it. Jack didn't move right away. He stood there with the dish towel still looped through his hands, as if any sudden motion might fracture the moment into something unmanageable. When he finally crossed the room, he didn't ask questions. He sat beside her and pulled her gently into his chest, one arm firm around her shoulders, the other resting at her back like a steadying hand on a ladder rung. Cassy didn't cry. That surprised her most of all. Her body felt hollowed out, as though something essential had been removed without her consent or awareness. She stared at the wall across from them, noting the faint scuff near the baseboard they'd never gotten around to repainting, and wondered how the world could remain so aggressively ordinary. I didn't know, she said after a long while. I really didn't know. I know, Jack said softly, though she wasn't sure how he could. She told him everything in pieces. The name in her phone, the disconnected number, her grandmother's voice, how it had sounded older, sharper, and somehow kinder than Cassy remembered. The box, the way the line had gone dead without ceremony or comfort. Jack listened without interruption, which was one of the reasons she loved him. He didn't rush to patch over silence with solutions. He understood that some moments weren't meant to be fixed, only survived. I thought there would be time, Cassy said. The words tasted bitter. I always thought someday I'd call him. Someday I'd figure out how to talk to him without reopening everything. Jack's thumb traced slow, absent circles against her arm. Someday is a liar, he said. It pretends to be generous. She let out a short, humorless breath. That feels unfairly accurate. They sat that way until the pasta sauce began to bubble angrily on the stove, announcing its neglect. Jack excused himself, returned to stir it, then came back with 2 forks and the pan itself, setting it carefully on the coffee table like a peace offering. Dinner is aggressively informal tonight, he said. Cassy managed a small smile. That tracks. They ate without much appetite, trading bites and memories. Cassy found herself talking more than she expected, about childhood moments she hadn't thought about in years. The way her dad used to let her eat cereal for dinner on weekends. How he'd once spent an entire afternoon trying to fix a broken music box she'd gotten from a yard sale because she'd looked disappointed when it stopped working. I stopped remembering him as a person, she said slowly. Somewhere along the way, he just became a concept. A mistake I'd outgrown. Jack leaned back against the couch. That doesn't mean you were wrong to protect yourself. I know, she said, then quieter. But I might have been protecting myself from the wrong thing. Later that night, Cassy lay awake long after Jack's breathing evened out beside her. Sleep felt like an unreasonable request. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face at 16. How he tried to hide his devastation. How he'd nodded like he accepted her words even as they carved into him. She had nightmares about that look for years without ever understanding why. Now she did. Sometime just before dawn, she slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen, wrapping herself in Jack's old hoodie. The house creaked softly around her, familiar and safe. She poured herself a glass of water she didn't drink and sat at the table, staring at nothing. When Jack joined her a few minutes later, she didn't ask how he knew. He always did. I think I need to go see my grandmother, Cassy said. Jack pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Okay. She said there's a box, Cassy continued. Something my dad left for me. Jack nodded. Do you want me to come with you? She hesitated, then shook her head. No. I mean, yes. I don't want to do this alone, but I don't think I can drive myself. I'll drive, he said immediately. No hesitation. No conditions. Cassy swallowed. Thank you. They left that morning, the sun low and pale as it crept over the horizon. The drive was quiet but not uncomfortable. Jack kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on the console, close enough that Cassy could lace her fingers through his when she needed to. As the miles passed, Cassy's numbness began to thaw into something sharper. Anger came in flashes at first, memories reframing themselves in hindsight. Her mother laying out receipts like evidence. The way she'd scoffed when Cassy mentioned enjoying time with her dad. The quiet insistence that love was something you proved with money and proximity. not patience or effort. I was so sure, Cassy said suddenly. I was so sure he didn't care. Jack glanced at her. You were a kid. I know, she said, gripping her hands together. But I said things. I walked away. You were given a story, Jack said carefully, and you believed the person telling it. The words settled into her chest with a weight that felt both damning and relieving. She hadn't invented the resentment. She'd inherited it. They pulled into her grandmother's driveway just after noon. The house looked smaller than Cassy remembered, more fragile somehow, as if time had been slowly folding it inward. Ruth Michaels answered the door with a look that held recognition and restraint in equal measure. You look like him, she said after a moment. Cassy blinked. I do. Ruth nodded once. Around the eyes. The box waited on the dining room table, plain and unassuming. Cassy stared at it like it might move if she wasn't careful. You can take it, Ruth said. There's nothing in it for me anymore. Cassy nodded, unable to trust her voice. Jack squeezed her hand under the table. She lifted the lid. Inside were neatly stacked papers, receipts, official-looking documents, folders labeled in her father's careful handwriting. She didn't understand most of it at first, only the sheer volume. Proof, records, a life quietly accounted for. Then she saw the personal items. A handmade birthday card, bent at the corners. A chipped mug that read best father ever. And finally, a folder. Cassy opened it. Her breath left her all at once. Photographs, taken from a distance. Her high school graduation, she recognized the gym decorations immediately. Her college ceremony. Her wedding. She remembered the day. The way the light had filtered through the trees, the laughter, the joy. Her father had been there. Every time. She pressed the photo to her chest, grief and fury colliding so violently she had to stand to keep from collapsing. He was always watching, Ruth said quietly, even when he wasn't allowed to be seen. Cassy's hands shook. Every lie she'd believed unraveled in an instant, and for the first time since the phone call, she cried. Not just for the father she'd lost, but for the years she'd never known she was being loved. Chapter 3. Evidence. Cassy didn't remember sitting back down, only that at some point the chair pressed against the backs of her knees and Jack's hand was firm at her elbow, guiding rather than steering. The photographs lay spread across the dining room table like proof of a life that had run parallel to hers without ever intersecting. Her grandmother gathered them carefully, stacking them with reverence. You can look at those later, Ruth said. There's more in the box you should understand first. Cassy nodded, though the word understand felt ambitious. Jack pulled his chair closer, the wood scraping softly against the floor. He didn't look at the photographs again. He looked at Cassy, watching her the way people did when they were bracing for something they couldn't soften. The documents came next, receipts at first, dozens of them organized by year, clipped together with yellowed paper clips. Cassy picked one up, then another, her eyes scanning automatically. Those are child support payments, Ruth said. Every month. On time. Cassy frowned. That can't be right. Ruth's mouth tightened. It is. Cassy flipped through them faster now, pulse picking up. The amounts were consistent. The dates unbroken. No gaps. No excuses. Her breath came out sharp. My mom said. I know what your mother said, Ruth replied evenly. Your father knew what she said too. Cassy's hands shook as she reached for the next folder. Court documents. Official stamps. Legal language dense enough to demand attention. Jack leaned in, reading over her shoulder. This says he paid for your college, Jack murmured. Cassy froze. What? Jack pointed. Here. Tuition reimbursement. Housing allowance. Cassy stared at the page until the words blurred. Her mother had framed every expense as sacrifice. Late nights, extra shifts, complaints muttered under her breath as she wrote checks Cassy had believed came from sheer willpower. I thanked her, Cassy whispered. For everything. Ruth said nothing, which felt louder than interruption. Another folder waited beneath the rest, thicker than the others. A private investigator's report, neatly bound, with dates and photos clipped into the margins. Cassy hesitated. What is this? Ruth folded her hands. The reason for the divorce. Cassy opened it. The words extramarital relationship jumped out immediately, clinical and merciless. There were timestamps, locations, grainy photographs of her mother sitting far too close to a man Cassy didn't recognize at first, until she did. Her mother's supervisor. The man who'd attended family barbecues. The man Cassy had hugged goodbye at Christmas. Her stomach lurched. He didn't want you to know, Ruth said quietly. He thought it would hurt you more than help. Cassy laughed. A short, brittle sound that startled even her. That's ironic. Jack's jaw tightened. Jesus. Ruth's voice remained steady. Your father fought for shared custody. Your mother fought for control. He lost more than he won. Cassy closed the folder with a decisive snap. Something hot and volatile burned behind her eyes. Not grief now, not confusion. Fury. She lied, Cassy said. The words came out flat, dangerous in their calm. She lied to me for years. Jack reached for her hand, but Cassy pulled back. pacing the length of the dining room. Her thoughts raced, rewiring memories at alarming speed. The comments, the sighs, the pointed looks whenever Cassy mentioned enjoying time with her dad. The way her mother had smiled thinly when Cassy complained about him being late once. It had never been about truth. It had been about narrative. I walked away from him, Cassy said, voice rising. I told him I didn't want him anymore because she convinced me he didn't love me. Ruth stood then, slowly, joints protesting. She crossed the room and placed a hand on Cassy's shoulder, firm, grounding. He never blamed you, she said. Not once. Cassy's breath hitched. How could he not? Ruth met her eyes. Because he was your father. The room fell quiet again, the kind of silence that followed detonation. Jack cleared his throat gently. There are more things in the box. Cassy nodded, wiping at her face with the heel of her hand. Yeah, let's finish. The personal items waited at the bottom, as if deliberately buried beneath the evidence. Cassy lifted the birthday card first, the one she'd made at 5 with crooked letters and too much glitter. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table, tongue poked out in concentration, insisting it was perfect. The coffee mug came next, chipped but clean. Best father ever. Cassy snorted through tears. I had excellent taste. Jack smiled faintly. Still do. Then there was the last item. A thin envelope tucked beneath everything else. Cassy slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. Her father's handwriting, neater than she remembered, but unmistakable. Cassy, if you're reading this, it means you finally reached out. I hope you weren't scared. I was proud of you every day, even when I didn't know you anymore. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder when you pushed me away. I thought loving you meant letting you go. If I was wrong, I hope you can forgive me. She folded the letter carefully, hands trembling. I'm going to kill my mother, Cassy said calmly. Jack blinked. Metaphorically. Yes, Cassy said. Emotionally. With facts. Ruth huffed a quiet, approving sound. They left the house an hour later with the box secured in the trunk. Cassy sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Jack glanced at her. You okay? No, she said. But I'm functional. That's my girl. Cassy let out a shaky laugh. I missed him. My whole life, I missed him without knowing it. Jack reached over, squeezing her knee. You know now. She nodded, anger still simmering beneath the grief, sharp and purposeful. And for the first time since she was 16, Cassy Drewer knew exactly who had loved her all along, and who had taught her to look the other way. Chapter 4, The Rewriting. Cassy didn't sleep the night they came home. She lay on her side facing the window, watching the faint orange glow of the streetlight smear itself across the glass like an unfinished thought. Jack slept behind her, one arm flung possessively across her waist, his breathing deep and steady. Every so often she felt his fingers twitch, as if some part of him knew she was awake and refused to let go just in case. Her mind wouldn't stop. It replayed moments with cruel precision, lifting them out of the past and holding them up to the light like evidence in a retrial she never asked for. Her mother at the kitchen table, tapping a pen against a stack of bills. Her mother sighing loudly when Cassy mentioned her dad had bought her new shoes. Her mother's voice, calm, wounded, persuasive, saying, if he really cared, he'd do more. Cassy had believed her because belief was easier than suspicion. Because trusting the parent who showed up every day felt safer than defending the one who didn't. She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. I'm sorry, she whispered into the dark, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was apologizing to. Morning arrived anyway. Jack woke to the sound of the coffee grinder and found Cassy already dressed, standing at the counter with her arms crossed and her jaw set in a way he recognized immediately. Oh, he said gently. That's your I have a plan face. She glanced at him. I don't have a plan. He poured himself coffee. That's worse. She huffed a short laugh despite herself. I keep remembering things, and every memory feels like it's been edited. Jack leaned against the counter, mug warming his hands. You're rewriting. I don't want to, Cassy said. I liked the old version. It made me feel justified. Justified isn't the same as healed, Jack said. She shot him a look. Did you read that on a mug? No, he said. But if you want, I can have one made. That got a real laugh out of her, brief but relieving. She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion seeping in now that the adrenaline had worn off. They were all there, she said quietly. The signs. I just didn't know how to read them. Jack nodded. You were fluent in the language you were taught. That afternoon, Cassy pulled the box out again. She spread the contents across the living room floor, methodical now. The fury had cooled into something sharper, more focused. She wasn't spiraling anymore. She was investigating. She read every receipt, every court document, every clipped note. Dates aligned with memories she'd once blamed on her father's indifference. Missed recitals that coincided with court hearings. Late pickups that matched double shifts he'd worked to stay current. There was a strange comfort in the order of it all. Proof had weight. Proof didn't argue back. Jack sat nearby, pretending to read while actually watching her reactions. He learned quickly which moments required silence and which ones benefited from commentary. "This says he paid extra the month you broke your arm," Jack said at one point. Cassy blinked. "My mom said insurance covered it." Jack raised his eyebrows. "Insurance did not send handwritten checks." Cassy snorted. "Wow. Fraud and emotional manipulation." She was really multitasking. Jack winced. "I'm guessing this isn't the rom-com version of Revelations." "Oh, there's comedy," Cassy said. "It's just bleak." By evening, her anger had sharpened into resolve. "I need to talk to her," Cassy said, pacing. "Not today. Not while I'm still vibrating. But soon." Jack nodded. "What do you want from that conversation?" Cassy stopped. Thought. "I want the truth," she said finally. "And I want to say my piece without getting pulled back into her narrative." Jack smiled faintly. "That sounds very adult of you." She rolled her eyes. "I contain multitudes. Mostly rage." That night, Cassy dreamed of her father. Not as he'd been at 16, frozen in devastation, but younger, laughing, holding her shoulders as she learned to ride a bike, standing at the edge of a crowd, watching with quiet pride. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a strange sense of peace underneath them. The days that followed were uneven. Some moments hit her out of nowhere. Standing in line at the grocery store, hearing a song he used to play in the car, seeing a man with the same posture in a coffee shop. Other moments were unexpectedly light. She found herself telling Jack stories she'd forgotten she remembered, laughing at details that now felt tender instead of distant. "I forgot how funny he was," she said one evening. "Dry, subtle. He used to pretend he didn't understand my jokes just to make me explain them." Jack grinned. "That's diabolical." "I know," Cassy said fondly. "He'd have loved you." Jack's smile softened. "I think I would have liked him too." They sat together on the couch, Cassy's feet tucked under Jack's thigh, the box now neatly repacked but no longer intimidating. It felt less like a burden and more like an inheritance. "I used to think love had to be loud to be real," Cassy said. "That if someone wasn't in your face, they weren't showing up." Jack brushed his thumb across her knuckles. And now I think some people love quietly because it's the only way they're allowed to." Jack nodded. "That doesn't make it smaller." "No," Cassy agreed. "It makes it harder to see." She exhaled slowly, the weight in her chest shifting. Not gone, but redistributed. "I don't know how to forgive myself," she admitted. Jack considered that. "Maybe you don't start with forgiveness. Maybe you start with understanding." Cassy leaned into him. "I understand that I was manipulated. And that you were a kid," Jack added. "And that he loved me anyway," Cassy said, voice thick. Jack kissed the top of her head. "Especially that." Later, Cassy pulled out her phone again. Not to scroll, not to distract herself, but to open her contacts. She stared at the name she'd avoided for so long. Michael's Brian. She edited it. The change felt small and monumental all at once. "I wish I could tell him," she said softly. Jack squeezed her hand. "You still can." Cassy closed her eyes, imagining her father somewhere beyond anger, beyond hurt, beyond the silence she'd imposed. "I see it now," she whispered. "I see you." And for the first time since everything shattered, Cassy felt the story begin to knit itself back together, not as it had been told to her, but as it truly was. Chapter 5, Conversations That Never Happened. The letters were at the bottom of the box. Cassy found them 2 days later, after the initial shock had softened into something livable and the house had returned to its normal rhythms. Jack was at work, the dishwasher hummed in the background, and sunlight spilled across the living room rug in a way that felt almost deliberate. She hadn't meant to open the box again. She told herself she was reorganizing it, making it easier to store, protecting fragile things, but the truth was simpler. She missed him already. Now that she knew how present he had been, his absence felt louder than ever. The letters were bundled together with twine, each envelope addressed in her father's careful handwriting. Cassy. No dates. No instructions. Her throat tightened. She sat on the floor with her back against the couch and untied the bundle slowly, as if rushing might startle the past into retreat. The first letter was short. "Cassy, I saw you today. You looked happy. That was enough for me. That was it." Cassy pressed the paper to her chest and laughed through tears. "You're killing me," she told the empty room. The next letter was longer. "I wanted to come talk to you after the ceremony. I stood up twice and sat back down twice. You looked busy being loved. I didn't want to interrupt." Cassy closed her eyes, picturing it. Her father in the crowd, wrestling with the same hesitation that had shaped so much of their relationship. Never wanting to impose, always choosing distance if it meant her comfort. "I wish you'd interrupted," she whispered. She read on. The letters weren't confessions or apologies. They were observations, small moments preserved like pressed flowers. Notes about her smile, the way she held herself with growing confidence, the man she married. "He seems kind. I hope he makes you laugh." Cassy snorted. "Relentlessly," she said. By the fourth letter, she was crying freely, no longer trying to contain it. The tears weren't sharp anymore. They moved slowly, heavy with tenderness rather than pain. Jack came home to find her like that, sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, eyes red, expression strangely peaceful. "Oh," he said softly. "Is this a bad cry or a good cry?" "Both," Cassy said. "Mostly necessary." He set his bag down and joined her on the floor without another word. She handed him one of the letters, watching his face as he read. "He loved you a lot," Jack said quietly. "I know," Cassy replied. "I just didn't know how." They sat together, reading in companionable silence until the letters ran out. That night, Cassy dreamed again. But this time, the dream wasn't passive. She stood in a familiar place, a memory reconstructed from fragments. Her father's old living room, the one with the mismatched furniture and the faint smell of coffee. He was there. Not younger, not older. Just him. They talked. She didn't remember what was said when she woke, only the feeling of having finally finished a sentence she'd been carrying for 20 years. The next morning, Cassy found herself speaking to him out loud. She did it accidentally at first, muttering under her breath while folding laundry. "You would have hated these socks," she said, holding up a neon pair Jack loved. "You were aggressively practical." The words hung in the air, absurd and comforting. Later, she did it on purpose. She sat on the couch, box beside her, coffee cooling in her hands. "I was so sure I was right," she said. "I built my whole personality on it." The room didn't answer, but she imagined he would have smiled. Not indulgently, not dismissively. Just sadly amused. "I wish you'd told me," she said. "About Mom. About the money. About all of it." She paused, then exhaled. "No," she corrected. "That's not true. I wish I'd asked." Jack overheard her one evening and stopped short in the hallway. "Am I interrupting?" he asked gently. "No," Cassy said. "You can say hi if you want." Jack hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Hi, Brian," he said to the room. "I'm Jack. I married your daughter. She's a lot." Cassy laughed. "Rude." "She's also amazing," Jack added. "And I promise I'll take care of her." The air felt warmer somehow. That weekend, Cassy visited her grandmother again. Ruth looked at her more closely this time, as if recalibrating. "You're lighter," she observed. "I think I'm finally listening," Cassy said. They sat together at the kitchen table, sharing tea and stories Ruth hadn't told before. Not out of secrecy, but because Cassy had never been ready to hear them. "He used to rehearse what he'd say if he ever ran into you," Ruth said. "In the car. Out loud." Cassy covered her mouth. "What did he say?" Ruth smiled sadly. "He never decided. He was afraid the wrong words would push you further away." Cassy swallowed. "I wish he'd known there were no wrong words." On the drive home, Cassy felt something shift again. Not dramatically, not explosively. Just enough to notice. That evening, she took out her phone and opened a notes app. She titled it "Things I Would Have Told You." She wrote until her fingers cramped. About her job. About Jack. About the way she finally understood what love looked like when it wasn't performative. She didn't edit. She didn't censor. She let the words tumble out the way they would have if he'd been sitting across from her, coffee in hand, listening without interruption. When she finished, she felt wrung out and strangely complete. Later, curled up in bed, Jack traced idle patterns on her arm. "You seem steadier," he said. "I am," Cassy replied. "Still angry, still sad, but steadier." Jack nodded. "That feels right." She turned to face him. "You know what's weird? Only one thing?" he teased. "I spent years thinking I didn't need him," she said. "Turns out I didn't need his presence. I needed his truth." Jack kissed her forehead. "You have it now." Cassy smiled faintly. "Yeah, I do." As she drifted towards sleep, she imagined her father somewhere beyond regret and misunderstanding, finally knowing she saw him clearly. And this time, there was nothing left unsaid. Chapter 6. The Long Shadow of Silence. Cassy waited a full week before calling her mother. It wasn't avoidance, at least not entirely. It was preparation. She needed the anger to cool into something she could carry without dropping it everywhere. Rage was loud and satisfying, but it was also sloppy, and Cassy had learned, painfully, that loud emotions tended to get repurposed by her mother into proof of instability. So she waited. She reread the documents until they no longer made her hands shake. She rehearsed sentences out loud, trimming them down when they drifted toward accusation and building them back up when they softened into apology. Jack listened from the doorway more than once, offering gentle edits like an editor who knew when not to touch the work. "You don't owe her vulnerability," he said one evening. "You owe yourself honesty." That became Cassy's anchor. She called on a Tuesday afternoon, when she knew her mother would be home and alert, not distracted by work or company. The phone rang twice. "Hello?" her mother said, voice warm with practiced cheer. "Hi, Mom," Cassy replied. Her own voice sounded steadier than she felt. "It's me." "Well, hello, stranger," her mother said lightly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Cassy closed her eyes. "We need to talk." There it was, that subtle shift, the recalibration Cassy had grown up recognizing. You sound serious, her mother said. Is everything okay? No, Cassy said. It isn't. Pause. Do you want to come over? Yes, Cassy said. I do. She drove herself this time. Jack offered to come, but Cassy shook her head. I need to do this alone, she said. I need to know I can. Her mother's house looked the same as always, manicured lawn, wind chimes by the door, the faint smell of lemon cleaner inside. Familiarity pressed against Cassy like muscle memory, urging her to relax, to fall back into old roles. She didn't. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where receipts had once been laid out like evidence. Cassy noticed that immediately and felt a grim sort of clarity settle in. Her mother poured tea. So, she said, sitting down. What's going on? Cassy placed a folder on the table between them. Not aggressively, just deliberately. I went to see Grandma Ruth, Cassy said. I got the box Dad left for me. Her mother's face stilled. Not shocked, not confused. Guarded. Oh, she said. I didn't realize you were back in contact with her. I wasn't, Cassy replied. I was trying to contact Dad. Her mother's lips pressed together. I see. Cassy slid one document forward. Then another. Then another. I know he paid child support, Cassy said. Every month. On time. Silence. I know he paid for my college, Cassy continued. I know you told me he didn't. Her mother inhaled sharply. Cassandra. And I know why you divorced him, Cassy said, her voice steady measured. I know about the affair. That did it. Her mother leaned back in her chair, folding her arms like armor. I did what I had to do, she said. You were a child. I protected you. Cassy nodded slowly. You protected your version of the story. That's unfair, her mother snapped. You have no idea what that marriage was like. You're right, Cassy said. I don't. But I do know what my childhood was like. And you lied to me. Her mother scoffed. I told you what you needed to hear. No, Cassy said gently. You told me what you needed me to believe, and you robbed me of the chance to know my father. The words landed heavily between them. I walked away from my father because of you, Cassy said. I told him I didn't want him anymore. Her mother's voice softened. A well-worn tactic. You were hurt, confused. I never told you to do that. You didn't have to, Cassy replied. You just had to repeat the same message long enough. Her mother shook her head. You're rewriting history. So am I, Cassy said. But mine is based on records. That stung. Cassy saw it register. The first crack in the certainty her mother had carried for decades. I loved you, her mother said quietly. I know, Cassy replied. But you taught me that love was conditional. That it had to be proven with money and sacrifice and suffering. Dad loved me quietly. You taught me to distrust that. Her mother's eyes glistened. But Cassy didn't move to comfort her. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about boundaries. I'm not here to punish you, Cassy said. I'm here to tell you that I see it now. And it changes things. Changes how? Her mother asked. Cassy took a breath. I won't participate in rewriting the past anymore. I won't let you speak badly about him. And I won't let guilt be the currency of our relationship. Her mother stared at her, disbelief flickering across her face. So what? You're just going to forgive him and make me the villain? Cassy shook her head. No, I'm not interested in villains. I'm interested in truth. Another silence. This one brittle. I did my best, her mother said finally. I believe you, Cassy replied. But your best hurt me. That was the line. The one Cassy had practiced and revised and finally trusted. Her mother looked away. What do you want from me? Cassy stood, gathering the folder. Accountability, she said. Not apologies. Not explanations. Just acknowledgement. She paused at the door. I loved him. I just didn't know it. The drive home felt different. Not lighter exactly, but quieter. The confrontation hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't ended in reconciliation or revelation. But it had ended something else. The long, echoing silence inside Cassy that had been filled with doubt. Jack was waiting on the porch when she pulled into the driveway, as if he'd been summoned by instinct alone. She stepped out of the car and he didn't ask how it went. He just opened his arms. Cassy collapsed into them. I didn't forgive her, she said into his chest. And I don't think I need to. Jack kissed her hair. Sounds like progress. She laughed weakly. I didn't cry. Also progress. They went inside, shedding the weight of the day slowly. Cassy curled up on the couch, exhausted in a way that felt earned. I thought confronting her would make everything clear, she said. Instead, it just made things defined. Jack nodded. Clarity doesn't always come with closure. Cassy stared at the ceiling, thinking of her father. Not as a wound anymore, but as a presence she carried. I don't need her to validate what I know, she said softly. I know who loved me. Jack smiled. And who still does. Cassy reached for his hand, anchoring herself in the present. The shadow her mother had cast over her past finally receded. Not erased, not forgiven, but understood. and that was enough to let the light in. Chapter 7, Becoming a Daughter Again. Cassie hadn't expected her grandmother to become the bridge. It happened quietly, without ceremony, the way real changes often did. One phone call turned into two. Two turned into a standing Sunday afternoon visit that Cassie began to look forward to with a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. She told herself it was about learning more, about her father, about family history, but beneath that was something simpler and more fragile. She was learning how to belong to that side of herself. Ruth Michaels greeted her the third Sunday with an apron on and flour on her hands. "You're late," she said mildly. Cassie checked her watch. "I'm 4 minutes early." Ruth sniffed. "Then you're late emotionally." Cassie laughed, surprised at how easy it felt. Noted. They baked together that day, an activity Cassie didn't remember ever doing with her grandmother. The kitchen filled with the warm, comforting scent of cinnamon and butter, and with stories, unprompted, unfiltered, and oddly affectionate. "Your father burned everything he cooked until he was 30, Ruth said, sprinkling sugar with unnecessary force. "Refused to follow recipes. Said they stifled creativity." "That explains so much," Cassie said. "He once tried to make spaghetti without water." Ruth snorted. "That sounds right." They talked about his stubbornness, his quiet humor, the way he never spoke badly about Cassie's mother even when he had every reason to. Ruth told her about his last years, how he took early morning walks, how he kept a photo of Cassie on his nightstand even when it hurt to look at it. "He was proud of you," Ruth said, as if it were a statement of fact rather than consolation. "Always." Cassie let the words settle. They no longer felt like something she had to argue with. She found herself asking questions she hadn't known how to form before. What was he like when he was young? What did he want to be? What scared him? Ruth answered patiently, sometimes with humor, sometimes with pauses that suggested the memory needed time to surface. "He wanted to be the kind of father he never had," Ruth said once, "and he worried every day that he was failing." Cassie swallowed. "He didn't." "I know," Ruth said, "but he never stopped worrying anyway." On the drive home, Cassie felt something unfamiliar and gentle unfurl in her chest. Not grief exactly, not joy either. Recognition. That night, she told Jack everything, pacing as she spoke, animated in a way she hadn't been since before the phone call that started it all. "She has his laugh," Cassie said. "It just sneaks up on you. And she keeps correcting me when I say, 'my dad,' like I'm borrowing the term instead of owning it." Jack smiled. "How does that feel?" Cassie paused. "Right," she said. "It feels right." She had always thought reclaiming her father would feel dramatic, like a reckoning or a public declaration. Instead, it was happening in small ways. She added his birthday to her calendar. She started saying "my dad" out loud without flinching. She caught herself smiling at men who shared his posture, his quiet attentiveness. One evening, while reorganizing the hall closet, she found the diamond necklace he'd given her at 16, still in its box. She hadn't worn it once. She held it up, watching the stone catch the light. "I didn't understand this," she said to Jack. "I thought it was guilt." Jack studied it. "It looks like hope to me." She wore it the next day, not because it was expensive, not because it was symbolic, but because it was hers. At her grandmother's insistence, Cassie began helping sort through old photo albums. There were pictures she'd never seen, her father holding her as a baby, asleep on his chest, her first birthday, frosting smeared across her cheeks, her parents laughing together in a moment frozen before everything fractured. "This doesn't hurt like I thought it would," Cassie admitted. Ruth nodded. "That's because you're not mourning what you never had. You're honoring what you did." Cassie absorbed that slowly. One afternoon, as they flipped through a stack of photos, Ruth said, "He would have liked who you became." Cassie looked up. "I spent a long time thinking I became who I was without him." Ruth met her gaze. "Love doesn't disappear just because you stop seeing it." The words echoed long after Cassie left. That evening, she stood in the doorway of her bedroom, watching Jack read, and felt a strange surge of gratitude so sharp it almost hurt. "What?" he asked, catching her expression. "I used to think I wasn't someone who needed a father," she said. "Turns out I just needed to know I had one." Jack closed his book and opened his arms. "Come here." She went willingly, resting her head against his chest. "I feel like I'm learning how to be a daughter again," she said. Jack kissed her temple. "You always were. You just didn't have the language for it." Cassie smiled, warmth spreading through her. She didn't get the years back. She didn't get the conversations or the shared holidays or the chance to apologize face to face. But she had something else now, something sturdier. Context, truth, a lineage she could finally step into without shame. And for the first time in her adult life, Cassy Drewer carried her father not as an absence, but as a presence, woven into who she was becoming, steady and unafraid. Chapter 8, Love That Stays. Cassie didn't realize how much her father's absence had shaped her marriage until she started feeling him everywhere. Not as a ghost, not as grief, but as a quiet recalibration of what she noticed, what she valued. Love, she was learning, didn't need witnesses to be real. It needed consistency. It needed return. Jack had always been steady. That hadn't changed. What had changed was Cassie's ability to see it without fear. They were folding laundry on a Sunday afternoon, the windows open to let in the early spring air. Jack was methodically pairing socks, frowning with exaggerated concentration. "These two are absolutely not the same," he said, holding up a navy sock and a slightly less navy sock. "They're identical," Cassie said. "They're cousins at best." Cassie laughed, leaning back against the couch. The sound surprised her, not because it was loud, but because it was unguarded. There had been a time when laughter felt like a performance, something you offered as reassurance. Lately, it just arrived. "You know," Jack said, tossing both socks into the acceptable pile. "I've been thinking." "That's never ominous," Cassie replied. He grinned. "I think I understand now why you used to flinch whenever things felt easy." Cassie stilled, then nodded. "Because easy didn't feel earned. And because you learned that love came with an invoice," Jack said gently. She swallowed. "Yeah." Jack set the socks aside and turned to face her fully. "You don't owe me proof," he said. "You never did." Cassie looked at him. The man who had shown up without fanfare for years, who had loved her without leveraging it for gratitude, and felt something click into place. "I know," she said, "but I think I finally believe it." That night, they went out to dinner at a small neighborhood place they'd been meaning to try for months. The food was decent, the service enthusiastic but scattered, and the wine list unapologetically overpriced. Perfect, in other words. They talked about work, about nothing, about everything. Cassie found herself telling Jack more stories about her father. Small ones, inconsequential ones that somehow mattered most. "He used to pause movies to explain plot points I already understood," she said. "Like I was humoring him." Jack smiled. "I do that." "I know," Cassie said. "That's why it feels familiar." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm glad." So was she. Later that week, Cassie made a decision she'd been circling for days. She told Ruth, "I want to do something for him," Cassie said over tea. "Not a service. Not something performative." Ruth considered that. "He hated fuss." "I know," Cassie said. "That's why it has to be quiet." They settled on something simple. A bench. There was a small park near Ruth's house. Nothing special, just a walking path and a few trees that bloomed spectacularly in the spring. Cassie remembered going there as a child, feeding ducks and complaining about the smell. "He used to sit there and read," Ruth said, "after you stopped visiting." The thought tightened Cassie's chest, but it didn't break her anymore. They ordered the bench together, choosing plain wood and a small plaque. No dates. No grand declarations. For Brian, who showed up. The day it was installed, Cassie stood beside it with Jack, hands clasped in front of her like she was trying to keep herself anchored. "It feels right," she said. Jack nodded. "It does." She sat down, letting the weight of herself settle into the wood. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined her father beside her. Not speaking, not asking anything of her. Just sitting. "I wish you'd seen this version of me," she said softly. "I think you would have liked her." Jack sat beside her, close but not crowding. "I think he helped make her," he said. Cassie smiled. On the drive home, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and calm, the kind that followed something finished properly. That night, she dreamed again. This time, her father wasn't watching from a distance. He was beside her, not saying anything, just nodding as if to say yes, that's it. She woke with tears on her cheeks and relief in her chest. The following weeks were ordinary in the best way. Cassie returned to work with renewed focus. She laughed more easily. She stopped apologizing for taking up space in conversations. She noticed that when Jack's father called, she no longer felt that quiet ache of comparison, only appreciation. She started asking Jack questions about his childhood, about the things he loved and the things that scared him. Not because she needed to measure herself against his past, but because she wanted to know him more fully. One evening, as they cooked dinner together, Jack said, "You feel different." "Better different or suspicious different?" Cassie asked. "Grounded different," he said. "Like you're standing on both feet now." Cassie nodded. "I think I stopped bracing for abandonment." Jack's hands stilled. "I'm not going anywhere." "I know," Cassie said. "And I don't need you to promise it anymore." He turned and kissed her. Soft, familiar, unhurried. Love that stayed didn't announce itself. It just remained. Later, Cassie opened the notes app on her phone, the one titled "Things I Would Have Told You," and added a final entry. "I'm okay. I'm loved. And I know now that I always was." She saved it, then closed the app without ceremony. The box went back into the closet that night, not hidden, not avoided, just stored. It no longer felt like unfinished business. As Cassie turned out the light and curled into Jack's side, she felt the last sharp edges of her grief smooth into something else entirely. Not forgetting, not forgiveness, but integration. Her past no longer tugged at her like an open wound. It rested within her, solid and understood, shaping her without defining her. Cassy Drewer slept deeply that night, held by a love that had never left her, and by one that had always stayed.